Okay, we need to get this settled. Which is the better DLC in Skyrim, Dawnguard or Dragonborn? In this video, I'll be comparing these two expansions based on the new weapons, armors, locations, the best storyline, and its quests, and additionally comparing some of the main antagonists, taking an in-depth look into the quality of each of these. Both expansions offer amazing experiences, but which one is overall the most superior? So for those who haven't fully played Skyrim and its expansions, there will be heavy spoilers in this video. You have been warned. Let's talk weapons first. Dawnguard gives us access to Dragonbone smithing. Without improvements, these weapons actually deal more damage than Daedric weapons. However, they have more weight to them as a penalty. It's really only a slight improvement over Daedric items. But when it comes to aesthetics, they're certainly not bad. It's a simplistic style, but it's pretty fitting. Sleek and simple, without being too dull. The Warhammer is quite literally a Dragonbone. These are up there as some of the strongest weapon types in Skyrim. In the Dragonborn DLC, however, we're introduced to Stalrim. It's ancient Nord enchanted ice that can be used as crafting material. It's excellent for its enchantment multipliers as well. Stalrim weapons do the same amount of damage as ebony weapons do, but way less as a benefit. I personally like the icy aesthetic of the Stalrim weapons, however. When excluding enchantments, Dragonbone weapons are stronger than Stalrim weapons. But with some proper enchanting done, Stalrim might just one-up Dragonbone material. You can implement chaos enchantments onto Stalrim, for example, and can expect to do some mighty damage. Chaos enchantments are some of the best in the game, in fact. Stalrim weapons are faster than Dragonbone, so your DPS will be higher. And then it simply comes down to aesthetics. I would personally have to choose Stalrim over Dragonbone. Not only for the stats, but also for the icy look. They're both pretty excellent overall, but with a 20% boost to Chaos and Frost, you simply can't go wrong. The Dragonborn expansion also gives us a new set of Nordic weapons. They have a similar damage output as Elven weapons, but way less. I personally like the design of the Nordic weapons. But let's compare them to Dawnguard's signature weaponry. Upon joining the group, we're given a selection of axes, hammers, and crossbows. But they're pretty excellent, and even better for taking out vampires and the undead. That's really the main selling point for these weapons. They're specifically effective against vampires and the undead. Not to mention the runic and enhanced variants of these weapons having lots of potential. As we're finally introduced to crossbows in Dawnguard, they deal more damage per hit than bows. While bows offer a higher DPS, crossbows also offer good range, and explosive bolts are always fun. But the reloading process may discourage people from using crossbows, while others simply enjoy cranking up that bad boy. Having the faster reload perk certainly helps the experience though. Despite getting used to crossbows, they serve well for sneak archer builds. And of course, we can acquire some fantastic ranged weapons in the Dawnguard expansion, such as Auriel's bow and Zephyr. Based on a damage over time perspective, these are perhaps some of the best bows in the game and due to unique enchantments. In Dragonborn, however, we can get another top-tier ranged weapon, the Dwarven Black Bow of Fate. It has some excellent enchantments, but the damage may fall short in comparison to other bows, such as Auriel's. There's a variety of more unique weapons we can find on Solstheim, such as Stormfang. It's one of the very few unique respawnable weapons. It's easy to obtain early and has a strong shock enchantment. With high smithing, it's viable late into the game, and you can return to the location at later levels to obtain a copy with a stronger enchantment. Plus, the name is just simply cool. The Bloodscale Blade is another powerful and unique weapon. It's equivalent to a glass greatsword, and it's a thrill to swing beams of energy toward your enemies. Miraak's sword is also extremely interesting, and has the highest base damage of any one-handed sword. While not the strongest enchantment, it absorbs stamina, so you can keep dishing out power attacks. Harkon's sword in Dawnguard is great for spell swords and battle mages, but it may not be worth it for a long-term vampire build. Its base damage is only fairly decent, and you'll be recharging often. It's probably better off as a trophy weapon if anything. The Dragonborn DLC simply has more weapon variety in it than Dawnguard does. So overall, if I had to choose which weapons I would use in which DLC, I would personally choose Dragonborn content over Dawnguard. But if I were a sneak archer, I'd go with the latter. The bows and crossbows are simply top tier. Moving forward, who's got the best armor items out of these expansions? Skyrim from the Dragonborn DLC also comes with armor sets. This time you've got ancient enchanted ice protecting you. I'll admit I'm not a huge fan of the helmet though, but some fellows may consider the horns pretty rad. The chaos and ice enchantment bonus makes Skyrim quite effective. There's also a light armor variant, known as Deathbrand. The enchantments of each piece is amplified by wearing more pieces of the set. Deathbrand is possibly one of the best for light armor users, and offers tons of benefits. But if I were to look at the Dawnguard armors from the other DLC, they're one of my personal favorite armor aesthetics. Certainly one of the best looking heavy armors, in my opinion. When it comes to the vampire side of things, however, I don't find them as exciting as Dawnguard armors. The royal variant I could probably tolerate, but these are really the only commonly seen armors in the expansion besides the opposing faction. But the Dawnguard armors never seem to get old for me. Not to mention the ancient Falmer armor, a truly epic-looking armor. Though unfortunately not obtainable until finishing the entirety of the Dawnguard DLC. Though I find that the Nordic carved armor in Dragonborn to be a good contender for some of the best-looking heavy armor. And I love how it looks on a Khajiit. But then again, everything looks good on a Khajiit. Dragonborn offers more armor selections than Dawnguard, some that are excellent for mer characters. From Chitin armor, to Bone Mold, to Morag Tong armor. Not to mention that we're finally given Telvanni robes, my sweet, sweet Telvanni robes. For magic users, you simply can't go wrong. There's certainly more variety going on here. We can also collect more Dragon Priest masks in Dragonborn, if you're an esteemed collector. Meanwhile, Dawnguard gives us some quite terrifying looking Falmer armor that you will probably poke yourself in the eye falling asleep in. I find that these are for more niche players, seemingly for those who are into the more sinister look. It does look pretty epic in general, but often more difficult to obtain. So with that being said, comparing the armors and clothing that we're given in these expansions, I have to go with the Dragonborn DLC. From Skyrim armor to Nordic carved armor to those sweet Telvanni robes. As much as I love the Dawnguard and their signature armors, there just isn't as much variety here in comparison to Dragonborn. Now it's very important to look at the different locations that we're given within these two expansions. I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into it. People hate the Soul Cairn. Well, not necessarily everyone. I personally enjoy it if I'm invested enough into my playthrough. But many people would cast down the entire Dawnguard DLC based on the Soul Cairn alone. It's even compared to Blackreach. The first time entering this new location was an amazing experience. It's a landscape that you've never witnessed in the game until now, but the traverse throughout the ghostly wasteland can be quite the chore after a good amount of playthroughs. The aesthetic is marvelous, but the navigation is truly a pain. The downside is that there isn't too many interesting things going on here, only just a few side quests. I personally don't find the Forgotten Vale as tedious as the Soul Cairn. It's a fantastic landscape with some interesting tidbits of lore scattered around. Bethesda always was excellent with environmental storytelling. The place is beautifully designed to explore a land that's literally been forgotten for thousands of years, and with the captivating background music to match. Of course, you must overcome the dangerous Falmer Valley before arriving here. Some would rather just push through the tedium and continue the quest line. Therefore, the Forgotten Vale has garnered a certain distaste. But needless to say, both of these locations are a bit of a mixed bag for players. These can be compared to other realms, such as Apocrypha, a location we can explore in Dragonborn. It's one of the most creative dungeons in the game. It's interesting, yet terrifying, with an eldritch atmosphere to match. Apocrypha is presented in the lore as a vast library where all the secrets of Mundus and Oblivion are stored and documented. It's such a fascinating realm, and even better for those who enjoy Lovecraft themes. But alas, not everything can be perfect. Some players truly don't like Apocrypha, whether it's too creepy for some or too tedious to journey through. It's a love-hate relationship, perhaps. I find it great for those who want a unique dungeon crawling experience that's filled with challenges. But overall, in terms of quality, I'll have to choose treading through Apocrypha over the Soul Cairn. Not only that, but Apocrypha gives us some extremely useful powers with the black books that you can find here. The ghostly wasteland mostly consists of aimlessly wandering around for players. Aside from the pretty aesthetic, you're essentially running around an empty box full of skeletons with only limited side quests to find. Whereas in Apocrypha, there's that feeling of creepiness and uncertainty that's ever more present. Plus, the stronger enemies keep you on your toes the whole way through. The world around you is always changing and interweaving to keep things interesting. While the Soul Cairn, and perhaps also the Forgotten Vale, are one of the biggest reasons why playing Dawnguard can be discouraging for some. Looking at the more prominent locations in Dragonborn, Solstheim makes a long-awaited return. It's a huge nostalgia trip for those who've played previous Elder Scrolls games. From the architecture, the clothing, the goods, the ash, the plants, etc. Those who've played Morrowind will appreciate it more than those who haven't. We get to explore the often dangerous ashlands, the exotic mushroom landscape of Tel Mithrin, the Skoll village that's nestled amidst the icy tundras, and much more. There's tons of dungeons and often horrifying enemies for the player to encounter. However, some filthy outlanders some players would find the landscape of Solstheim quite dull and depressing, which in a way, perhaps it may be. You see, there's a certain sadness that permeates the soundtrack and most Dunmer locations. This is the last holdout of their province, and they're clinging on to their culture. Dawnguard, however, doesn't really offer anything on this scale. The Forgotten Vale is a beautiful landscape with good environmental storytelling, but not as significant in terms of content. And the Soul Cairn is just the Soul Cairn. In the Dragonborn DLC, we can claim ownership of Severin Manor after doing specific quests, but it's not possible for spouses, children, or housecarls to live there. However, Severin Manor does come complete with fully stocked enchanting, alchemy, and armory areas, and it's got good space for storage and item displays and available merchants just outside. But the eerie music inside never ends. Ever. In Dawnguard, we can choose between the fortress or Harkon's castle of vampires. I find them both pretty exceptional. Dawnguard Fortress is a huge, imposing structure and looks amazing on the outside, though I recall getting lost more than a few times inside. I'm not particularly a huge fan of the interior design, a great faction headquarters nonetheless. You get vampire hunting companions, war dogs, and armored trolls at your side. You really can't go wrong with that. Harkon's castle is fitting for all your vampire needs, but I feel as if this side doesn't offer as much content as the Dawnguard side does. Some of the residing vampires don't even respect you after the questline is complete, and there isn't as many thralls at your disposal. Choosing a player base ultimately comes down to personal opinion, and based on what kind of character you're playing. But if I were to choose which locations I preferred out of these DLC, I would have to choose Dragonborn. Now, which expansion has the better questline? The beginning of the Dawnguard DLC is all about joining the group and becoming a vampire hunter. But the Radiant quests are actually quietly some of the best parts of this DLC and some of the only vampire hunting, or hunting as a vampire, that you can really get. While the main quest seems to become more saturated by other deeper motives, it kind of loses the essence of becoming a vampire hunter as you go deeper into the story. So the Radiant quests are certainly enjoyable for that aspect. It's often pointed out that you have to join with the Dawnguard to be able to join with the vampires, even if you're already a vampire while joining the Dawnguard. But as Todd Howard so famously says, it just works. Even more is that Serana is forced to join your company, even while being a so-called vampire hunter. How would good characters such as paladins or Daedric hunters approach this situation? There are certainly roleplay reasons you could develop as headcanons, but you really have no choice in the matter. Speaking of which, if Serana didn't exist in the DLC, would you still enjoy it as much? Her and her family obviously play a large part in the story, but some parts feel as if Serana is forced upon us. There are apparent holes in the storyline, and they can be pretty immersion-breaking, but these points may not be very significant to some. One of the highlights for me in the Dawnguard questline was meeting one of the last surviving snow elves, and the deeper lore that we're introduced to by Knight Paladin Gelebor. Exploring the Forgotten Vale, the challenging fights, and retrieving Oriel's bow. Witnessing this land that'd been hidden for thousands of years, the tragedy of the snow elves makes it hauntingly beautiful. I found Verther to be one of the most interesting antagonists in the game. He's the vampiric snow elf that created the prophecy that Lord Harkon is chasing, and the fight between him is truly a memorable one. All of this happens near the end of the Dawnguard storyline, however. In many quests in Skyrim, the player is often a tool for someone else's benefit. In the Civil War, we must help Ulfric or Tullius in their conquest. In Dawnguard, we're basically an instrument for fetch questing, either for the good faction or the vampires. Most Daedric encounters consist of the entities using you for their own advantages. Even Delphine thinks she can walk all over the Dragonborn, of all people. But in the Dragonborn DLC questline, it's you against Miraak, two powerful rivals against one another. You're being hunted by cultists, which calls you to track down the source of the problem. You really feel like the main character in this story. Not to mention the amazing other quests that Solstheim gives us. You have the Reekling quests, the Skarl village content, the Black Books, the one and only Neloth himself, the Redaran assassin side quest, and much more. Not to mention one of the most interesting Daedra in the series, driven to obtain the rare, forbidden knowledge of the Skarl. While Neloth is entertaining and charming as he asserts his superiority over you. The Dragonborn DLC may be considered a bit short, but it isn't long and drawn out like Dawnguard tends to be. And although I think Miraak could have been fleshed out a bit more, he serves well as an interesting antagonist. I'd argue that the main quest in this expansion is better than the one in the vanilla game. So with that being said, I think that Hearthfire is the greatest DLC in Skyrim by a long shot. No debate, no argument. Oh, I'm only kidding. I say that Dragonborn is the superior Skyrim DLC, though I respect differing opinions on this. Nonetheless, I find both of them excellent in their own way and offer different experiences for whatever the player may desire. If you've made it this far into the video, you have my uttermost thanks. Until next time we meet, hail Sithis.